So I want to share a story with you. My freshman year of high school, I was your average teenage girl. Kind of weird to think about. But I wore skirts that showed off my freshly shaven legs. I woke up 30 minutes earlier that could have been used to sleep in just because I wanted to straighten my hair, and I let it grow as long as possible. And like any other teenager, I was facing some internal crisis within myself. But instead of what class if I would pass my history test, if I would get into the college I wanted, or what career to take on, it was something so much more than that. It was a dark pit in the center of my chest that haunted me day and night, that pounded in my ears every second I wasn't thinking, was always there in the back of my mind. I couldn't even identify what it was, but it was always there. I decided soon that this was beyond your average teenage angst. This was more than depression. This was unbearable self-loathing. It was the kind of self-loathing that involved me cutting my skin because I felt I deserved punishment because I would never be good enough. I felt overwhelmingly awkward, even around my closest friends, and I felt I didn't fit anywhere. But soon, as my freshman year came to a close, I realized my long-time questioning came to an end. It took place in the form of awareness to what I hadn't even realized I had been feeling my entire life. It was a conversation between my mom and I, and it wasn't until we brought up the word transgender that everything finally made sense. I only know one transgender person my entire life, but suddenly, in the blink of an eye, I had something I could identify with. I was transgender. Despite my lack of education on the topic, it seemed easy enough for me to understand. Transgender meant someone who was born in the wrong body. So that night, I jumped around as happily as I could be, believing I had solved my own 15-year-old version of the Da Vinci Code. I'd even laid out my life plan. I would be your average androgynous stay-at-home looking mom, and I'd live the rest of my life as a guy stuck inside a girl's body. Not too uncommon. But I realized I thought that just knowing who I was enough to satisfy myself for the rest of my life. And transitioning at the time seemed like just a choice to me. It seemed unnecessary and far too much work. I almost want to blame society for not letting me transition sooner. If the societal expectation is that only lesbian girls could transition to male, or they had to be some certain form of masculine to even look or live as male, I wouldn't have held so much anxiety into embracing my inner shell in the first place. Society gives us such a black and white definition of what it means to be transgender. They give us a binary to follow. Take Jared Leto in Dallas Buyers Club, for instance. That's probably the first person you think of when you think of average transgender person. I'm not saying that there aren't transgender people like him in the world, but that's the only person we think of. In reality, there is no average transgender woman, average transgender man, or quite frankly, an average human in this world. But due to this gender binary, I postponed my feelings in the beginning of the summer because I felt if I was truly meant to be a boy, I would have been born looking like one. Maybe it was in late July, or maybe it was early August when I finally decided to put an end to my own life. Back then, I would have said I was exaggerating when I said I hated myself. But as I look back, that was only an understatement. I hated every inch and every single piece of myself. And the only thing I could possibly feel was the gray cloud hanging over my head, and sometimes even that felt numb. So that night, I cut myself as deep as I could go. In no way I could have died, but I still consider that a suicide attempt, because I know that was my intention. I know my intention was to go to sleep and never wake up ever again. But in a way, I can say I did commit suicide that night. Nothing changed about me the next morning. I was still as depressed and hollow, but I realized something. I had an epiphany. I realized if I had died last night, I would have been buried as a beloved sister and daughter. I wanted to be remembered as Julian, not as my past. So from there on out, I began to cut off my past and create my future. When the summer came in, my mom gathered information on all things transgender. I really take for granted how supportive my mom was of me in my journey. She had been the first person to see the light in my eyes, and she was the first person I came out to. It's statistically proven that parents are the most protective factor to keeping a transgender child alive. It is also statistically proven that 41% of transgender people attempt suicide, compared to just 1.8% of non-trans people. So as my mom gathered information on all things transgender, she soon found a trans support group for me to attend. I decided I'd give it a try, but I worried for what was to come. Would I be trans enough for them? Would they see me as a girl? Would they judge me? My questions were soon answered when I was immediately greeted at the couch in the corner of the room. It took me a second to realize it, but I was the only trans man there, and I was also the only one under 40 years old. But despite the age and gender difference, it was an immediate match. But as we went around and introduced ourselves, I suddenly went silent. What name was I supposed to give out? I did have a name, but no one had said it to me before. Well, I mean, I have a name picked out for me, but no one's ever called it to me before. Well, you have to start somewhere, don't you? Asked the leader. I guess you're right. My name's Julian. Well, it's great to have you here, Julian. That night I will remember for the rest of my life. I can easily see that's truly the place where it all began for me. This is the first place I could be Julian, and I wouldn't have to worry if people would see me as a girl or a boy. As my sophomore year came in, I suddenly began to become impatient with my looks. I'd come out to most people, and most people addressed me as Julian. But I still had non-existent leg hair, and my voice still sounded like a girl. I knew testosterone would have to come soon. I consider myself lucky because I was able to decide when I was ready to become my true self, rather than my parents. So many people were unfortunate during this time. I think they're going to regret it. I think they should wait until they're 18. It's probably just a phase. What I want people to understand is there is no waiting. When you finally understand the path you're meant to follow, there's no reason to turn back. Sorry, I forgot a line. But we all messed up, okay? But anyway, so one aspect of why I'm alive today is because of top surgery. To society, it'd be considered to be a double mastectomy, but in my community, it's called top surgery. Testosterone is one of the main reasons I'm alive, but that was another factor that helped me realize my true self. Even before I had started living as Julian, I knew this was the path I was meant to follow, but it only seemed like a dream to me at the time. But when I still felt uncomfortable over my body, I realized it would have to come soon. I can go into my experience about this, but I don't want you to think this is the surgery that made me into a man. I was just as much as a man with breasts, just as much as I am a man without them. What matters is this made me more uncomfortable with my body. No genitals should determine gender, just as no face should determine a story. Even today, being 1 year and 2 months on T and over a half-year post-op, I'm still left uncomfortable in my body. And I realize that I'm not the bearded and masculine man I hoped to be in the beginning. But I also realize that I don't want to be that Bradley Cooper anymore. I happily identify with being a Julian-presenting individual. I by no means identify with anything particularly feminine, but I don't see myself as the masculine man people assume I wanted to be either. And no one spontaneously decides that they want to be transgender one day. And I realized it wasn't even a choice. No one decides to wake up hating the sex they are born as, and no one decides they want to be transgender one day. Ooh, I think I'll be trans now. What a fine day to be transgendered. And don't even get me started on the misused words and slurs we face. I'm a transgender person, not a transgendered person or a tranny. You get baptized, you don't get transgendered or blonded. And I can see your expressions asking me, well, how can I be a good ally to the trans community? Well, here's Transgender 101. Listen to what I educate you on. Ask about my pronouns. And don't ask about my birthday beforehand and a list of surgeries I've had, because frankly, it's none of your business, and there's a reason I keep it in the past. The theme for TEDx this year is Epiphany. And obviously, you can see I've gone through quite a few. But I don't feel like there's one that changed it all. There was that day in May when I found something I could finally identify with. And I do consider that a big part of my life. But I feel like, in reality, I'm going through one big epiphany of discovering myself. And every day I learn something new. I'm blessed to go through the hardest time in my life, because that's what led me to the greatest part. And because of my choice to embrace myself rather than killing myself, I have never been happier. If I hadn't embraced myself, my birthday would be on my gravestone, and I won't be here sharing my story with all of you. So as long as each and every one of you stands, I encourage you to take off that mask you may be hiding behind. There's never a beginning until you make it one. Thank you.